Oh yeah, this is riveting footage. People are going to be hopping up and down to see this one. Yeah, this has really got some legs. Love to be a fly on the wall when they're watching this. Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Weird Project. In today's episode, I'm making a piece of terrain inspired by a couple of toy frogs I found at the dollar store. Let's hop to it. Sorry. The idea for this project came when I was at the dollar store and I spotted a package with these two toy frogs in it. They sit flat on a surface and they're bigger than the Imperial Guardsmen I keep around for scale. So I thought, what if we made a shrine, like a shrine to the frog gods out of these guys? And that's where I went. I did up some sketches. Apologies for the quality, I'm not a drawing artist. And got really inspired by what I was seeing in my head and having it on paper in a couple of different angles here. I needed a piece of foam board for the wall that the frog statues, carvings, whatever, are going to be mounted to, and so cut that out first. I wanted the wall to look rough and ruined around the edges, so I drew a ragged line around 3 of them to cut out and make it look all messed up. One of the reasons I like this ready board from the Dollar Tree is that the paper peels off really easily, giving you an exposed foam surface. This in turn allows you to add textures with various methods and techniques. For example, this is an acrylic texture roller from a company called Green Stuff World. I ordered this one and a technological flooring, industrial flooring one. I really like the product. I'm not affiliated with them, I like it. You just press onto the foam and roll it across, and it presses these textures in. Then I use the old tinfoil ball trick to distress the textures even more. Just putting in wear and tear, divots, notches, anything that the tinfoil catches. This is a really handy, easy way to simulate weathering on foam. I'm not sure if I should do the texture roller or the foam ball first. Something to experiment with. We can't just have a wall sitting on nothing. That's not how buildings work. So we need a floor for it to attach to. So I drew one out on some foam board and cut it out. To try to keep everything stronger, I put chipboard backing on both the floor and the wall. For the floor, I cut it out so that it had enough of an edge at the back that the wall would sit on it. This way the wall would have 2 surfaces to adhere to, the chipboard base of the flooring and then the back edge of the flooring itself at 90 degrees. And you can see that whole process in action right here. I apply some white glue, a longer, slower, stronger bond to the back edge of the floor, and then hot glue, which is quicker to set but less strong, to the bottom edge of the wall. Once I get this stuck down, I'll let the hot glue dry and then let the white glue dry overnight. This ended up being a super strong join. I never had any trouble with it. Came out really well. I remembered on my sketch that I wanted 2 pools of water, one underneath each frog carving. I probably should have done this before I glued the floor down to the chipboard backing, but I gotta have something for the lessons learned section, right? So I used a bottle cap to mark out some circles and then dug them out with my X-Acto knife. The bottom is messy, but honestly I kind of wanted the bottom to look sort of muddy and messed up, stirred up, so I think this is probably okay. I also wanted to seal the inside edges of the foam and also add some continuity to the flooring. So I used some joint compound to kind of smear around and smooth things out. Not smooth in the sense of a nice smooth bottom, but make waves and peaks that sort of look more organic than bitten off foam from an X-Acto knife. Now the walls and the floor are ready to paint, and I wanted to try out something that Black Magic Craft advocates on his channel, link down there, which is to mix Mod Podge and black paint to create a sort of sealant and primer all in one. You cover the whole thing with it, and because it's nice and black, you get to see anywhere that you've missed and come back and make sure it's nice and covered. Another thing I wanted in the design was an altar or a table or something where the rituals are performed to honor the frog gods. And I thought the fun way to do it would be to use 2 stones as the base of the table, and the table is just kind of rough-hewn planks on top of it. So I picked out a couple stones that I thought worked well together, cut out a couple planks from popsicle sticks, and then started trying to stick them all together. Adhering the wood to the stones turned out to be pretty tricky. I tried hot glue, super glue, and the stones would just pop off again after a few minutes. So I decided the stones, while neat, probably weren't going to work, at least not the way I was using them, and I would need to do something different. So I ended up just making risers out of more planks, like whoever made this had just stacked planks up until they got to the height they wanted, and went with that, and it worked pretty well. I glued the frogs onto the wall next, which may have been a mistake. It might have been easier to get the wall painted first. That way everything would look a little more consistent and uniform, but overall I think it worked out okay. I wanted to add a little spice to the altar, table, thing, whatever. And I had these skull beads that I found at a craft store. I thought it'd be cool to maybe stick a few on some toothpicks and have those glued down to the table. The hole in them is too big for one toothpick, so I ended up doubling up. I think it looks alright. It took a few tries to get it glued down into the corner of the table. The sticks and the skulls kept jiggling around, and I had to try a couple of different ways to get them secured, but it got on there eventually. I started painting the wall and the floor with a heavy overbrush of a medium gray. Probably a little more than I should have. It got into the cracks in the texture, but it's okay. The wash helped out later. Having stonework that's all one uniform gray, or even variations of gray, can be a little dull and lead to a piece that seems kind of dead. So it's a good idea to add some brown tones and some earthy tones to bricks in kind of a random pattern, just sort of wherever strikes your mood. So that's what I started doing next. Began with a very light tan, and then added a little bit of a darker brown to it, darkened it up, and just repeated that process several times to get several different variations of a brown, earthy tone. I also added in some specific light gray bricks, just to not completely abandon that tone either. This whole process of painting the individual squares was surprisingly satisfying. I really enjoyed doing it, especially the ones where the tinfoil ball texture afterward had broken up the shape a little bit. So I tried to make sure that the paint, the color, followed that. And it was pretty neat. I did a fairly quick and simple paint job on the skull spike thing and the table. Basically just brushed the planks with camel, my favorite light tan color, and my favorite name paint. And also put that color on the skulls and the spikes, and then dry brushed the skulls with successively lighter, pale, off-white colors. And then I eventually added some washes as well, and specifically put some black back into the eye sockets on the skulls to make them look dark. I filled the bases of the pools in with a regular brown color, and also tried to slop some of that color up on the edges to look like maybe things come in and out of that pool and get a little messy. We're getting close to the part that I was most excited about, but also most nervous about, which was painting the frogs. First, I needed to do a little bit of touch-up work with some black just to cover up the parts that the spray primer missed. Alright, time for some hoppin' action. Sorry. I knew I wanted more than just green frogs, plain green frogs. So I went and searched the internet, specifically for the phrase, interesting frogs, and holy cow, there's so many neat frogs out there in the world. I settled on one that was an orangish, reddish back, and then a white, almost honeycomb kind of pattern on its sides and its limbs. And the honeycomb cells get much smaller the closer you get to the ends of its limbs and its little fingers, or toes, or whatever frogs have. So first I started a series of thin coats of red, just pure red, to start bringing up the main color on the face and the back. This was eventually going to turn orange, but I needed to get a good, solid red going first. As I was waiting for a couple of those layers to dry, I switched to my Reaper Color Skeleton Bone. It's my favorite white, but not quite white. The pure whites can be a little chalky and hard to work with. So I took this color and started just seeing if I could actually freehand some of this honeycomb pattern onto this frog, and I was really pleased with how it came out. As I worked my way out onto the limbs, I tried to be careful to make sure that the cells were getting smaller and smaller as I went. I just kept working and working, and before I knew it, maybe an hour later, I had this. Many coats of red later, it was time to start working on bringing in the orange. The change is pretty subtle at first, but gradually adding in more yellow each time and working with wet blending to kind of make the layers merge together a little bit better, I eventually arrived at a orangey natural color that I was pleased with. With the frogs done, we're getting close to the end of the project, so I started to work on a few last minute details. First, I wanted to add a little bit more color to the altar, so I first did some brown dry brushing on it to darken the planks a little bit. That didn't come out too well, but it did help a little. And then I added a mixture of red and black to maybe give the hint of a blood stain, and dry brushed that on just a portion of the table leading right up to the edge, and then dry brush that same color below onto the floor where it would have spilled over from the altar. Another important detail from my original sketch was the inclusion of some vines, some greenery, some encroaching jungle upon this shrine. So I started by laying out some green lines along the wall and the floor where I thought the vines would sit. My hope was that this green would give the impression of the vines having been there a long time, rubbing against the stone and leaving behind deposits of green. You might see that on the side of your house, for example, where the grass is tall. I got this stringy looking moss at a craft store, and I got it in 2 different colors to sort of add some visual interest and variation. Actually, adhering this stuff to the piece turned out to be one of the biggest challenges of the whole project. The first thing I tried was a 50-50 mix of PVA and water, and I thought I would soak a vine in it and then kind of stick it down and put it in the place where I wanted it. This worked okay on a little test piece I did on the back, because I also wanted to make sure that the paint wouldn't get disturbed by the moisture. I left it for a while and it stayed, and it was on there pretty good, so I thought this was going to work. The larger piece I needed, however, to go on the wall had a lot of sort of natural tension in it, and getting it to stay along the green line that I had painted where I wanted it was basically impossible unless I wanted to sit there for 4 hours and hold it. So next I decided to try some super glue, gel control super glue, in little dots sort of at the corners where the vine would make a turn. But the super glue took too long to set as well and kept sticking to my fingers, and the vine stuck to my fingers more than they stuck to the wall. I'm a member of a Facebook group called the Tabletop Crafters Guild, and there are tons of members, always people ready to answer questions. So after checking in with them, I decided to try hot glue. I put down little blobs, very small, same idea at the kind of turn points. And this time I came in with both colors at once, since I didn't want to try to reheat the glue for a second pass. It was a little tricky, but it actually worked this time. I used the clipped off end of a popsicle stick that was left over to kind of push the things down into the glue, hold them there for a second, and then kind of drag the popsicle stick away in a way that didn't pull the glue or the vines with it. Took a little practice, but I got it right. And once that was all done, I was over the moon with the result. Look how much more vibrant the piece is now. It's got some value contrast and the brightness of the green. It's got some hue contrast between the green and the orange. It's just great. There were a few shiny blobs of hot glue visible, so I took some smaller clump foliage and just stuck them down with a little bit of PVA glue to cover that up. And I made this little banjo just to honor my favorite frog, stuck that down next to one of the pools. Then I took it outside and did a spray varnish over the whole thing, not pictured here. And then I added the last step, which was this realistic water mixture from Woodland Scenics to fill up the pools and make them look real. I did this after the varnish spray because I didn't want the varnish matte coat to go over the water and make it look dull. And here's one of the pools close up after it's had a couple days to dry, and it looks really nice, very smooth and shiny, glassy water. The paint job underneath gives the impression of mud and muck under the water in the bottom of the pool. And here's a final shot of the finished product. I'm really pleased with it. I feel like the last few steps, the vines and the coloring on the frogs and the realistic water, just kind of make everything come together. It looks like a nice coherent piece. It's got a lot of visual interest. I'm just overall really pleased with it. I'm especially proud of the job I did on the frogs. I think I really did well with that. The layering of the colors and the blending on the back up to that bright orange from the low red really came together the way I wanted it to. I was really happy with that. And the line work on the limbs I was just astounded with how well I did with that. And even the kind of shaky edges you see, that actually matches the reference photo. Not intentionally, but it ends up that way. The little froggy head, his honeycomb pattern wasn't perfect. There were little juts and dots of white where they're into the black. There we go, piece of terrain that could be used in a role-playing game, fantasy setting, jungle setting, all kinds of stuff. I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out. Before I get to the lessons learned, I'll do all the standard pleading. If you like the video, please like it with the like button thing, and consider the subscribe and share buttons as well. If you want to support the channel, there's links down below, including my book on Amazon and some Amazon affiliate links for some of the supplies I use. I get a little cut if you buy those, but it shouldn't cost you anything extra. Okay, let's get to lessons learned. I do these projects as much to learn as to make something, so I like to round up some of those lessons at the end of each video. For the water pools, I think I should have dug those holes first, and I would have had a lot more control over what the bottom looks like. It turned out okay with the joint compound over the little bits of glue and foam. Looks suitably messy, but I would have preferred to have a little bit of a choice on that. This is my first time using Black Magic Crafts, what does he call it? His Black Magic coat, his Black Magic base coat. Black paint mixed with Mod Podge, and it worked really well. I'm pleased with it. I'm gonna stick to it from now on when I'm base coating big pieces like this. Those small smooth stones were pretty hard to adhere. I got some tips after the fact, but ended up just going with the wood. So I'm going to be careful next time I use the stones, doing a little prep, maybe sanding them to break up that smoothness a bit, and finding the right adhesive. Terry found a link to a chart that shows what adhesives can adhere what to other what's, lots of what's. And so we'll make sure that there's a link down there for you to take a look at that. It's a good idea to carefully plan when and how and what you're going to adhere to different parts. The frogs I put on the wall before I had painted pretty much any of the wall. And I think in this case that might have been a mistake. It would have been nice to have the bricks that were going to be under the frogs able to be painted cleanly, and then the frogs go on top. So it really looks like they were added to the wall. Other cases it might not matter, so it's important to kind of take stock and plan that out. The back of the frog was the first time I've tried wet blending, and it was a little scary. It looked like it was getting out of control at some points, but I think it turned out really well. So I'm looking forward to trying that again, maybe looking up some other tutorials and just to kind of get a little more grounded in it, but I feel like it's a good technique. On the video side, I feel like I'm definitely getting better at being aware of where I am with the camera. The new mount is helping by having the camera view screen where I can easily check it. So I think that's getting better. Still need practice. I think in the next video you're going to see even more improvement. As I was putting this one together, I started realizing more and more that the audio narration I might need to do some kind of equalizing or something with that so it has a nice uniform tone. Sometimes it feels clearer or louder or bassier or whatever than the others, and I want to look into how to make all of the clips nice and smooth. And lastly, I got some more stuff figured out about using my green screen and the camera. I figured out that I can actually adjust some of the coloring before it gets to the green screen processing. So this hopefully looks better, cleaner. Hopefully I don't look extremely pink and magenta. So that about wraps it up for this one. Thanks for joining me. It was a fun build. I really was pleased with the results. I'd love to hear what you thought in the comments. And again, if you've ever had any kind of cool inspiration and from a small piece and decided to make a whole big thing out of it, I'd like to hear about that too. Just like with the bulldozer I did back in episode 4 and this one. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. I actually have one other piece of toy construction equipment that I could use. And the package with the frogs actually came with some alligators and some snakes and maybe one other thing, I can't remember. So there's definitely more animal shrines in the future. Till next time, take care, everybody. I do these projects as much to make something as to learn something. No, that's wrong. I do these projects as much to make something... No, I did it again. This hopefully looks better, cleaner. Hopefully I don't look extremely pink and magenta. Magento. The X-Man. He's not an X-Man. Oh well.